Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Let us continue with Surah An-Nisaa bihawlillahi wa quwwatih. We are on ayah number 32. قال الله تعالى ولا تتمنوا ما فضل الله به بعضكم على بعض للرجال نصيب مما اكتسبوا وللنساء نصيب مما اكتسبن واسألوا الله من فضله إن الله كان بكل شيء عليما. So he begins this ayah by giving a prohibition, وَلَا تَتَمَنَّوْا, from tamanna yatamanna, tamanniyan, to yearn for something. Do not yearn for what Allah has favored some of you above others with. So faddala means to favor someone with something. So the reason that this ayah, first of all, is revealed is, as we find in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, Salama radiallahu anha said to the Prophet, O Messenger of Allah, the men go out to fight, but we do not. And we also earn half of what men earn from the inheritance. And so in response to this, Allah Jalla wa Ala sent down this ayah, that some of you should not yearn what Allah has favored others with. So Allah Jalla wa Ala has favored men, that they should be people of war who defend the community. That's an honorable position. And also that they receive more than women in inheritance, and other than that as well. There are many rules in which men are favored over women. And so the ayah says, do not yearn for what Allah has favored some over others with. So an example of this, that women should not yearn to receive the same as men in inheritance, for example. Rather, they should submit to the qadr of Allah Jalla wa Ala, because it is based on wisdom. And our job is to submit to Allah Jalla wa Ala. That is what Al-Islam is all about. Having said that, however, if you see that somebody has, let's say, a good job, and you would want a similar job to that person, then this is permissible type of yearning, because that particular job is halal for you. And you are not opposing the qadr of Allah Jalla wa Ala. You are not envious of this other person who has this prestigious job that you yourself are looking for. Opposing the qadr of Allah would be if you dislike that that person is occupying that particular job. So that would be wrong. But as long as you only yearn for similar to what he has, without feeling any resistance in yourself that this person has that particular job, or maybe feeling a dislike at the qadr of Allah, then that is perfectly permissible. You can yearn for similar to what others have in terms of job or a car and so on. Another example would be a person has a righteous spouse, be it a husband or a wife, and then you yearn that you should also have a righteous spouse. That is perfectly fine. However, if you yearn that the other person's marriage should end up in a divorce because you dislike that that person has a righteous spouse and you feel jealous, then yes, that is haram, and that is hasad, envy. Now it has also been said that this ayah came down because there were men who said that we hope to receive double the reward of women in the akhirah, just like our inheritance is double. And some women replied, we hope that our sins are halved in the akhirah, just like our inheritance is halved. And so in response to that, this ayah was revealed, and Allah knows best. Anyway, he goes on to saying that for men is a share of what they have earned, and for women is a share, so the word is nasib, of what they have earned. Iktasaba is the verb used, iktasaba yaktasibu iktisaban, which means to earn something. There are at least two interpretations to this part. One is that for men is a portion of the inheritance, and for the women is their portion of the inheritance, whatever that may be. And the other tafsir on this is that both men and women will have their portion of the reward in accordance with their actions. Then he says, ask Allah from His grace. The verb is was'alu. This is the order form of sa'ala yas'alu, su'alan, which means to ask or request. And fadl is grace. So this is general. It includes all type of grace. So it would include, for example, rizq or provision. It will also include asking Allah Jalla wa Ala to grant you tawfiq to worship Him in the correct manner and to increase you in obedience and guidance. So all matters that will benefit your lives, both in this world and in the hereafter. And he ends by saying that Allah knows all things. So in other words, He knows what is in your best interest. You might ask Allah Jalla wa Ala for a private jet because the idea of flying around in a private jet may seem like fun and great to you. And besides, a private jet is halal in and of itself. So you may ask for a private jet. However, this may not be in your best interest, either in this world or the hereafter. So the point is, if you do not get what you hoped for or yearned for, then just understand that Allah Jalla wa Ala knows that that particular matter is not in your best interest, as He is all-knowing. So reflecting on this ayah, we learn that you're not allowed to yearn for those things that Allah Jalla wa Ala has favored others with. You're not allowed to yearn, for example, to become a prophet. Women are not allowed to yearn that they should receive the same inheritance as men, and all the other matters with which men are favored, such as testimony and blood money and other matters like these. And like we said, if you dislike anything which Allah has favored another person with, then this is envy or hasad. According to majority opinion, hasad is when you desire that that particular favor of a person be removed from him or her. In any case, both definitions of hasad are rebukable qualities. But like we said, you can yearn for that which is similar to what another person has. And we gave the example, if a person has a great job and you would want a similar job, but you do not dislike that that person occupies that job, and neither do you yearn that this person be removed from that particular job. So as long as it's halal for you, you may yearn for it. Or for example, a person has memorized the Quran. You also yearn to memorize the Quran. That's absolutely fine. But you should not yearn that that other person should forget the Quran and that this ni'mah be removed from him. This is haram. We also learn from this ayah that Allah favors some people over others. For example, He has favored men with certain rules which do not apply to women. This is out of His wisdom and the way He works. And our job is to submit to this. Because if we do not submit, then that means we are not happy with the qadr of Allah Jalla wa Ala. And anyone who is not happy with the qadr of Allah Jalla wa Ala is in fact not happy with Allah as their Rabb. And this is precisely what we find with atheists, who say, how can a good God make good people suffer gratuitously? We also learn from this ayah that Allah Jalla wa Ala loves that people should ask Him from His grace. And so when you ask Allah Jalla wa Ala with a sense of urgency and desperation. You need to feel needy and broken before Him. Not only that, but you need to feel that Allah Jalla wa Ala alone is the one who can answer your dua, because He has the ability to do so, and that you hope for the best from Allah Jalla wa Ala. So husnul dhan. And also that you are certain that Allah Jalla wa Ala will respond in some way or another. So you're fully reliant on Allah in answering your dua. And also from the etiquettes of dua is that you do not ask for something which is either haram to ask for, or that which would oppose the qadr of Allah Jalla wa Ala, because this would be ta'addi or transgression in your dua. So what you ask for needs to be, first of all, halal in the sharia, and secondly, should not oppose the qadr of Allah. And we also learn that Allah is knowledgeable about all things, and that includes His decree. And the rules and regulations that He lays out for us, they are based on knowledge. And so therefore it is upon us to submit to the ahkam of Allah Jalla wa Ala, both shar'iyah and kawniyah. Ayah number 33. وَلِكُلٍّ جَعَلْنَا مَوَالِيَ مِمَّا تَرَكَ الْوَالِدَانِ وَالْأَقْرَبُونَ وَالَّذِينَ عَقَدَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ فَآتُوهُمْ نَصِيبَهُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ شَهِيدًا. He says, وَلِكُلٍّ, for every person, جَعَلْنَا, we have made or we have appointed, مَوَالِيَ. Now, mawaliya is the plural of mawla. This could have various meanings. It could mean a servant. It could mean a master of a servant. It could mean a freed servant. But in this context, it means an inheritor. As for when he says وَلِكُلٍّ, and for each, this could mean either for each inherited wealth, we have made an inheritor, or it could mean for each deceased person, we have made an inheritor. The word mawla can also mean a helper or an ally as well, as in Surah Ad-Dukhan, يَوْمَ لَا يُغْنِي مَوْلًا عَنْ مَوْلًا شَيْئًا. No helper can avail his ally in aught. He says, from what the walidan, parents, and aqrabun have left behind. Aqrabun meaning relatives, from qarib meaning near, because these people are near to you blood-wise. So what is apparent from this ayah is that for every deceased person, there is an inheritor who will inherit what the parents and relatives have left behind. So for example, if you are the deceased person, then Allah has made for you an inheritor who will inherit what your parents and relatives have left behind. So that is to say, your parents died and you inherited their wealth. You die, and Allah has appointed an inheritor who will inherit from you, and you inherited the wealth which your parents left behind. This appears to be apparent from the ayah. And he says, وَالَّذِينَ, and those, عَقَدَتْ, meaning to tie, عَقَدَ يَعْقِدُ عَقْدًا, to tie something as in to tie a rope. أَيْمَانُكُمْ, plural of yameen, that's an oath. You've tied your oaths, meaning to say, you've taken a pledge of brotherhood with those people. In the days of Jahiliyyah, and even in the beginning of Al-Islam, two people could take an oath of allegiance with each other, so they would become brothers by way of oath. This would even enable them to inherit from each other, and they would pay each other's blood money if one of them murdered another person and had to pay blood money, and so on. They were like blood brothers. In this ayah, Allah Jalla wa Ala tells them that if you have made any pledge of allegiance, of brotherhood, then fulfill the pact that you have made, because of course you do not go back on your word. However, there is no inheritance between two people who are not blood related. So that part is abrogated. As for anything else that you have pledged, then fulfill your word. This is why he says, فَآتُوهُمْ نَصِيبَهُمْ, give them their share, meaning the share of the pledge that you have pledged. So that is to say, fulfill your word. But afterwards, the Muslims were prohibited from making any new pledges. And all the believers are brothers by default. You do not need to make a pledge of brotherhood. And then he says that Allah is a shaheed over all things, meaning a witness. So this means He sees all things, He hears all things, He knows of all things, and will take people to task, good for good, evil for evil. So reflecting on this ayah, we take that the inheritance is pertaining to the blood relations, not to oath brotherhood. So that is to say, two non-related people take an oath of brotherhood. They do not get to inherit from each other. And this is what used to happen, like we said, and Allah Jalla wa Ala abrogated such a thing. We take that if you have taken an oath and given your word, you must fulfill it. Even if a person, before embracing Islam, gave his word to somebody, then even after embracing Islam, he is obliged to fulfill it, as long as fulfilling that particular oath or giving that particular word is not haram per se. And we also take one of the names of Allah, Shaheed, along with its attribute. And also when we know that Allah witnesses all things, then that needs to have an effect on our actions and our behavior. Ayah number 34. الرجال قوامون على النساء بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض وبما أنفقوا من أموالهم فالصالحات قانتات حافظات للغيب بما حفظ الله واللاتي تخافون نشوزهن فعظوهن واهجروهن في المضاجع واضربوهن فإن أطعنكم فلا تبغوا عليهن سبيلا إن الله كان عليا كبيرا. So in this ayah he says men are the qawwamun, which is the plural of qawwam, which means a caretaker and the one who is in charge. So this means to say that the wife is ordered to obey the husband because the husband has the authority over the wife in a marriage. And he gives the reason for this because of what Allah has made the men to excel over the women. Okay, so we ask the question, how do men excel over women? Well, we can give a few examples, but men are mentally and physically and emotionally stronger than women. And this is just the way it is, the way that Allah Jalla wa Ala has decreed it. And because of this, men are the ones on whom certain things are obligatory and not women, such as what? Such as being a judge or a ruler in a land, jihad fi sabilillah, the salat al-jama'ah, being an imam in a local masjid of a community, and of course all prophets and messengers were men, never women. So these types of vital roles which have an effect on the whole community are to be carried out by men because they are suited to the job. It is the way that Allah Jalla wa Ala has designed it to be the case. And because men are intellectually, physically and emotionally stronger than women, this is going to have a knock-on effect on other matters also, like inheritance and blood money and divorce and raj'ah, and also the number of marriages. Also the child is attributed to the father, takes the name of the father, and is from the lineage of the father, not the mother. And then he also gives a second reason why men are caretakers and in charge of women. He says because they spend on the women. So the husband spends on the wife. Min amwalihim, from their wealth, meaning from the men's wealth. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about the mahar, the bridal gift, and we're talking about the daily expenditure, which are food, clothing, shelter, and these types of matters. All of this is upon the man, not the woman. Then he says, فَالصَّالِحَاتُ, this means the righteous women. They are قَانِتَاتٌ, the feminine plural of qanit. This means obedient, as in obedient to the husband. حَافِظَاتٌ, from حَفِظَ, which means to guard, or safeguard, or protect. لِلْغَيْبِ, in the absence. بِمَا حَفِظَ اللَّهِ, with what Allah has guarded, meaning to say, with what Allah has ordered them to guard. So what is this all about? When the husband is absent, so he's gone off on a journey or wherever else, the woman is ordered to guard the property of the husband and not let anyone in the house whom the husband is displeased with, and also to guard her chastity, that is to say, not to commit adultery in the absence of the husband. This is what Allah Jalla wa Ala has ordered her to guard in the absence of the husband. As for in his presence, it would be easy to guard these things, but it would be easier for the wife to become treacherous in the absence of the husband. So this is when the guarding really matters. Then he says, for those women whom you fear, their nushuz. This comes from an-nashaz, which means an elevated place. And so nushuz here means when the woman essentially elevates herself from her status. So she challenges the authority of the husband, she disobeys him in those matters which are reasonable and permissible. Of course, disobedience is permissible if the husband orders her to do that which is haram. But what we are talking about is disobedience in reasonable and permissible matters. And so such a woman disregards the authority of the husband and gives the husband a difficult time. So this is the nushuz. So here Allah Jalla wa Ala says, فَعِذُوهُنَّ, then give them a maw'idha, from wa'adha ya'idhu, wa'adhan, to admonish someone. So this is verbally give them advice and tell them to fear Allah Jalla wa Ala and remind them of the duties of the wife. The Prophet ﷺ authentically said, if any woman prays her 5 and fasts her month of Ramadan and guards her chastity and obeys the husband it would be said to her, enter Jannah from whichever gate you wish. Then if the first phase does not work, he goes on to the next phase, وَهْجُرُوهُنَّ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ. So this is from hajr, from hijrah, meaning to abandon or to leave. Leave them in the madaji'. This is the plural of madja'un, which is a bedding. Leave them in the bedding could mean you turn your back to her on the same bed, and it can also mean sleep on a different bed. And then he moves on to the third phase. If that does not work, وَضْرِبُهُنَّ, hit them. And this is a disciplinary hitting, much like how a father may hit his child as a disciplinary hitting. It is not busting them up and making them bleed and bruising them. Even though hitting them is permissible to do, it is recommended not to, and that all matters can be resolved verbally and with proper communication, and even arbitration by getting others involved. Then he says, فَإِنْ أَطَعْنَكُمْ, if they obey you, فَلَا تَبْغُوا, do not seek, عَلَيْهِنَّ, against them, سَبِيلًا, a way. So that is to say, do not seek to annoy your wives after that, and do not seek to punish them, do not seek to rebuke them or scold them, because then that would be unjustified. And he ends by saying that Allah is Ali, high, and Kabir, great. This is a threat to the husbands by saying that even though you have authority over your wives and you can administer a disciplinary hitting, Allah Jalla wa Ala has yet more authority over you, O men, and He is higher and greater than you are. So if you were to abuse your authority over your wife, then you have Allah Jalla wa Ala to answer to, as He has authority over you. This ayah, they say, was revealed about a Sahabi, Sa'ad ibn al-Rabi', whose wife, Habiba bint Zayd, disobeyed him and angered him, and he slapped her. So the father of the wife went to the Prophet and complained, and the Prophet said that this is a case of qisas, so a slap for a slap. Then the Prophet changed his mind. He said that Jibreel has come to me, ordering me to do something, and he said that we, meaning the Prophet, intended a matter, and Allah intended a different matter, and what Allah wants is better. And he changed the decision and allowed the husband to administer a disciplinary beating in the case of nushuz. So anyway, reflecting on this ayah, we take that Allah Jalla wa Ala has favored men above women in many different ways, which we have discussed. We therefore also take the folly of this idea of equality between men and women. People who pursue this equality are essentially fighting against nature, and it's no surprise that they will never ever win. And it is also worth noting, as we reflect on this ayah, that just because men are superior to women, this is not an insult to women. It's just one is superior to the other. It does not mean that the one who is inferior is thereby insulted, as Allah Jalla wa Ala has not wronged anyone. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only ever administers justice or grace, but never oppression. We also take that the one who spends is superior to the one who is spent on, as men spend on their wives. That makes the men superior. And what results from this, if we continue the line of reasoning, is that you should not ask people for wealth, because then if they spend on you, they will become superior to you, and you do not want that. If anything, you want to be the superior. Always try never to ask other people for wealth, or anything else for that matter, as far as you can help it. We also take from this ayah that Allah Jalla wa Ala praises those righteous women who are obedient to Allah and their husbands, and they guard the wealth of the husband, and they guard their chastity when the husband is absent. So this is from the qualities that the wife should yearn to attain. On the other hand, we learn of the hurma of nushuz, and that the husband has the right to therefore discipline the wife, and this would be reasonable grounds for disciplining the wife, either by admonishing her, or by separating from the bedding, or by administering a disciplinary hitting. Note that the disciplinary hitting needs to avoid the face, and it needs to be 10 or less hits, as has been mentioned in the hadith. And it should also not cause any bruising or bleeding. The idea behind disciplining those under your authority is to make them fear Allah Jalla wa Ala. But if you bust them up and make them bleed, then they're going to fear you. And there is no goodness in them fearing you. That just turns the relationship sour. And so it is ironic that you will become the victim of your own beating. We also learn from this ayah that after the matter of nushuz is done and dusted with, the woman comes back to obedience, and the relationship settles down again, then forget about the past, ignore it, and move on. Do not bring up the past again and try to reproach the wife, because then this will just be a matter of stroking your ego, and your ego is not your amigo. We also take from this ayah the two names of Allah Jalla wa Ala, Ali and Kabir, along with their sifat, or the attributes which comes along with every name. And like we said, that these names are given as a threat to the husband. هذا والله أعلم.